Ladies and gentlemen, I am the AmericanSpyFox, and today we are reading Chapter 10 of Come As You Are by Michael Azerrad. I'm just kind of taking it easy today. Thought that I would get a chapter out of the way. I know a lot of you really enjoy hearing the book. Not a lot of people really watch or listen to this, but for those of you who do, I'm here for you. Let my soothing voice lull you to bed while I read about Kurt Cobain. I ought to start doing some ASMR. Anyway, I'd like to take a quick second to thank my members and patrons. You guys really kept the channel going through 2022. 2020, 2021 were good years for the channel. I didn't have to worry much. Maybe there were a couple bumps in the road, but this past year, YouTube really came down hard on my channel. It was members and patrons who kept it going. I really appreciate you guys. Chapter 10. The massive success of Nevermind was a complete surprise, but in retrospect, there were plenty of warning signs. Copies of the Smart Sessions tracks had been circulating throughout the industry and on bootlegs for well over a year before Nevermind came out. So industry tastemakers and music aficionados were already spreading the word about the band. The line for the Nevermind release party wound around the block. Nirvana's crack-smoking, kitty-petting t-shirts were very popular, providing massive amounts of free advertising. The band had done 3 U.S. tours and visited Europe twice. They'd gotten the enthusiastic blessing of the influential UK music weeklies, not to mention the all-important Sonic Youth seal of approval. True story. For those of you who have seen the smoking, I'm going to beep these words out because I'm hoping to at least get one monetized video in this month. Smoking, kitty petting, and worshiping mother. I had that shirt in 8th grade. And if you live on this side of the Mississippi, in 8th grade, it's like tradition for your class to take a field trip to Washington, D.C., and see all the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, Capitol Building, all that stuff, right? Well, I'm wearing this shirt. There's thousands of students waiting in lines to go in and to see Congress in action while they're debating and voting and doing whatever they're doing. And I'm wearing this Nirvana shirt. They made me turn my shirt. They made me take my shirt off in front of everybody and turn it inside out before I was allowed to enter the Capitol building in a country that prides itself on freedom of speech. Another thing that I wanted to say about this first page already, get ready. If you've never listened to me read books, I often add commentary. So if that's annoying to you, probably not the right channel. Copies of the Smart Sessions tracks had been circulating throughout the industry and on bootlegs for well over a year before Nevermind came out. Industry tastemakers and music aficionados were already spreading the word. Courtney Love is always looking for that next big thing, that next front man that she might be able to become friendly with, okay? Courtney knew this guy was going to be big before we did. And that's why she gives Dave Grohl the seashell box and tries to ingratiate herself into Kurt's life. Once she ingratiates herself into Kurt's life, she's done with Dave. She's like, I don't need you anymore. Sub Pop succeeded because Pavitt and Poneman had studied the successes and failures of other labels and cannily exploited the infrastructure they had already built. In the same way, the infrastructure was already set up for Nirvana to succeed as well. Promoters and booking agents who knew how to deal with this new breed of bands, and several even specialized exclusively in them. Madonna even she started her own record label, and she even tried to sign grunge bands. Nirvana retained top lawyer Alan Mintz, who had built up expertise and contacts by winning excellent deals for Jane's Addiction, Toad the Wet Sprocket, and a host of other new bands. Alan Mintz was hooked up to Kurt Cobain through Susan Silver. She rarely gets credit for Nirvana. Susan and Chris Cornell, they're a couple at this time. Susan is Alice in Chains and Soundgarden's manager. They saw the potential in Nirvana before anybody else did in the corporate world, in the mainstream world. She's the one who introduced Kurt to Alan Mintz. She said, these songs are very powerful and you don't want someone to steal them. You need to get them copyrighted. I'm going to introduce you to an attorney that can protect your intellectual property. So Susan Silver is responsible for that. I personally feel if Susan Silver would have managed Nirvana instead of Danny Goldberg, who really ingratiated himself with Courtney and became allies with Courtney to get Kurt to do what they wanted him to do. I think if Susan Silver had been the manager, I don't think she would have pressured him like Danny Goldberg would do to strike while the iron's hot, make as much money as possible, get out there on the road. I think Susan would have been more laid back. In the interview that I watched just the other day, I watched the whole thing, the Rick Beato interview with Chris Novoselic and Kim Thayil and Jack Endino. Kim talks about how they were telling the corporate people, you need to check out Nirvana. You need to check out Nirvana. And in the beginning, no one was listening to them. Nirvana saw Sonic's youth satisfaction with Gold Mountain, Geffen, and even video director Kevin Kerslake, and eventually followed them to all three. REM opened up the doors at radio for the band. These days, Kurt even uses REM's accountant. By September 24th, 1991, Sub Pop and grunge rock had begun to bubble their way into mass consciousness. But most consumers didn't know how to find the records, and the music wasn't being written up in the mainstream music press or played on big radio stations or MTV. So no one knew what grunge to buy, even if they did find it. The miracle of major label distribution gave Nevermind a major leg up by making it one of the first grunge records, and that little Sub Pop logo made it official to get distributed to the major record store chains, where anyone could and did buy a copy. Also, the album came out at the beginning of the academic year when college radio programmers are energetically looking for material to beef up their playlists. The music itself was a refinement and amplification of what bands such as Husker Du and The Replacements had done, although at root it plugged into a collective consciousness of both Black Sabbath and the Beatles. And then there was that smooth production. Nevermind was one of the first alternative records to sound good on the radio. Highly compressed, meaning the extremes of high and low volume were electronically limited. Andy Wallace's mixes were custom tailored for mainstream radio, which is, after all, still where sales campaigns are won or lost. Compared to the usual raw alternative recordings, Nevermind sounded like a Bon Jovi record. The production sugar-coated the band's bitter punk pill. Steve Fisk, who produced the blues sessions, feels that the record, with its heavily flanged bass and guitars and big reverberant drums, sounds very much like an early 80s British new wave record, hence what he calls the Janet theory. When Janet was 15, she was really into the Smiths, Fisk begins. They made her feel special about herself, and she spent long hours in her room with her Walkman on, and her parents couldn't bug her, and those morbid lyrics really reinforced all that. When they broke up, it was very hard for her. Then Morrissey went solo, but all her friends got into it, and it was very hackneyed. At maybe 16 or 17, she went into her British death gloom phase for real, Fisk continues. Then she dyed her hair black and looked like Susie, not understanding that it was a whole played-out cliche by that point. This is like 1986. It pissed off her parents, and none of her friends were doing something that radical with their looks, so it really made her feel good. Of course, that look came to the malls, and it got played out. Somewhere along the line, she got into the Sub Pop Singles Club, and she found some music that would really piss people off, and she became Grunge Girl. Collectively, that demographic was spring-loaded for a new wave punk record like Nevermind. The lyrics are happy songs with sad lyrics. It's The Cure. It's Joy Division, says Fisk. So poor Janet, she couldn't help but like it. Kurt Cobain enjoys this theory very much. It's probably true, Kurt says, laughing. The media made much of the fact that Bill Clinton was America's first baby boomer president, but they largely ignored the fact that boomers had already been dominating U.S. culture for years, especially the music business. Baby boomers control virtually every aspect of the mainstream music industry, guiding the signing of acts, radio airplay, press coverage, everything. I didn't know this because I was a youngin' in the 90s and I would not have been paying attention to politics. But I do remember Bill Clinton, and he played saxophone, and he'd get his D S'd by every intern coming and going and all that. But, So did JFK and every other president that went through the White House. According to Max Wallace, during our conversation, he said that Cobain is attributed to getting Bill Clinton elected as president. He says Kurt got a lot of people to vote for Clinton, but in all the old stuff, I wasn't paying attention then, and all the old stuff that I've watched and read now, I've never once heard Kurt say, go out there and vote. That was more Chris Novoselic. He was the one that was real political and urged young people to go vote. So I guess you could say Nirvana urged people to go vote. So baby boomer totems such as the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, and Bob Dylan remain benchmarks. Everything else is just a pale shadow. In other words, the boomers are in control, and they're keeping the music that they listened to when they were young in the mainstream, not allowing anyone else to flood those airwaves. Makes total sense. If you're the one with the power and the wealth, you can do what you want, and they're going to do what they like. The boomers bombard the airwaves with classic rock, and when people get sick of hearing Brown Sugar for the 3,298th time, they slot in a new artist like the Black Crowes or the Spin Doctors, who gladly caters to the same boomer standards, even as they claim to be rebels. I really need to do a video on 90s one-hit wonders. Anybody remember the Spin Doctors? Just go ahead now, and if you... Just go ahead now. Whatever happened to those guys? I'm going to start making those what the fuck happened to blah, blah, blah. I'm going to start making those videos. Those get a lot of views, don't they? But by the time Nevermind was released, a large new demographic had emerged. The 20-somethings hadn't been raised on Let It Bleed, the White Album, and Blonde on Blonde. Those were oldies. Some called them the Baby Busters, but they actually outnumber the boomers, and they wanted some music they could call their own. Nevermind came along at exactly the right time. This was music by, for, and about a whole new group of young people who had been overlooked, ignored, or condescended to. As the 20-something band Sloan sang in Left of Center, I really can't remember the last time I was the center of the target of pop culture. I'm slightly less left of center of the bullseye you've created. It's sad to know that if you hit me, it's because you were not careful. Ultimately, it wasn't so much that Nirvana was saying anything new about growing up in America, it was the way they said it. It represented, as Los Angeles Times pop critic Robert Hilburn said, the awakening voice of a new generation. This had all sorts of implications, from consumer marketing to political demographics. It also marked the definitive end of the baby boomers, who prided themselves on their youth as the sole arbiters of youth culture. A backlash was clearly in the cards. As if there was any doubt, Nevermind proved one and for all that indie rock had completely turned in on itself and become far from the unifying force that rock began as. Just as Kurt took the gutsy step of exploring his pop gift, Nevermind forced the denizens of the indie world to consider whether they could like music that everyone could like, and to consider the possibility that one of their own could make popular music that withstood an unspoken indie loyalty interest. Some felt Nirvana's mere popularity disqualified them. It was also alternative music that mainstream people could like too. Suddenly, alternative rock wasn't just the province of jaded college kids. It began to reflect the social realities of a struggling, changing nation. Nevermind and the funk and roll phenomenon, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Fishbone, Faith No More, etc., then enjoying its first flowering, renewed the inclusive power of rock. As Kurt came from working-class stock, the success of Nevermind was the ultimate expression of Sub Pop's populist ideals. It figures that the band came from an unlikely place, such as Aberdeen, rather than Seattle. Not only was the music compelling and catchy, but it captured the spirit of the age. In one of the countless articles on the emerging 20-something phenomenon, The Atlantic magazine commented in a December 1992 cover story that this generation, more accurately, this generation's reputation, has become a boomer metaphor for America's loss of purpose, disappointment with institutions, despair over the culture, and fear for the future. In that environment, it's no wonder that a song featuring a young man screaming with rage and pain could hit number one. Kurt screams in a code that millions can understand. He communicates in the same scattershot, intuitive way that his generation has been trained to assimilate and to express information. thanks to the usual litany of tens of thousands of hours of television advertising before they were even able to read, lousy schools, the glut of the information age, video games, etc. Kurt's lyrics make unusual sense of chaos. When he screams, a denial, over and over again at the end of Teen Spirit, it's something that is understood on a very deep level. And either you get it or you don't. It clearly draws the lines, even as it deals in universals, and it's one of the most transcendent moments in rock music. The Teen Spirit single went out to radio on August 27th, then it went on sale 2 weeks later on September 10th. The single sold well, but didn't immediately explode. But meanwhile, MTV accepted the video and a buzz was growing. The song was all over college and alternative radio. Teen Spirit was not supposed to be the hit. The second single, Come As You Are, was supposed to be the track that would cross over to other radio formats. And it did too, it was just as powerful. Teen Spirit was the base-building alternative cut. None of us heard it as a crossover song, says Gold Mountain's Danny Goldberg. Well, that's because you're a boomer, dude. But the public heard it, and it was instantaneous. Right away, the then emerging format of alternative radio began playing Teen Spirit. They heard it on alternative radio, says Goldberg, and then they rushed out like lemmings to buy it. Wow, what a dick. Rushed out like lemmings. It's hard to believe that a song can become a hit simply because it's very good, but this appears to be the case. Every once in a while, a song is that powerful, says Goldberg, and in their instance, they not only had a song that was that powerful, it combined with an image that was very attractive to a certain subculture. MTV did not begin pumping the Teen Spirit video immediately. The video did receive a prestigious world premiere, making Nirvana the first debut act since Bart Simpson to be so honored on 120 minutes. Do you guys remember 120 minutes? It was like on late at night and only like stoners and young people stayed up late to watch it. That's when they would put on the good bands. On 120 minutes, but only after Amy Finnerty, then a junior member of the programming department and a longtime supporter of new music at the channel, went into her boss's office and threw a little tantrum. Thereafter, the clip languished in graveyard rotation until entering the buzz bin, where the video channel hypes new artists on October 14th, 3 weeks after the album was released. It stayed in the buzz bin for 9 weeks, getting, as they say in the broadcast business, heavy phones. MTV market research revealed that Teen Spirit appealed to viewers across the demographic board. Goldberg says the album was virtually gold before MTV started playing the Teen Spirit video with any frequency. MTV, he says, was just a multiplier. It was really obvious that it was just the music, the song, and the desire on the part of the audience for a band to emerge did it, says Goldberg. R.E.M. maybe created that yearning. Jane's Addiction maybe created that yearning. But whatever it was, Nirvana was definitely in the right place at the right time. Nevermind grossed $50 million for Geffen. Not bad for an initial investment of $550,000. Wow. My God, you give someone 550 G's, you get back $45.5 million. Like, wow. Still no one rushes forward to take the credit. As Geffen president Ed Rosenblatt said to the New York Times, we didn't do anything. It was just one of those get out of the way and duck records. The phrase get out of the way and duck is repeated over and over again like a mantra by Geffen execs. What they mean is that as records hit certain sales plateaus, different marketing approaches kick in for the first million or so sales. Nevermind sold too fast for the marketing force to implement any approach. It was almost disappointing how fast it was going, says Goldberg. We were just trying to experience it because we knew it was a very rare occurrence. The success of Nevermind was reminiscent of the massive word of mouth campaign that had launched Bruce Springsteen a decade and a half earlier. What happened to Nirvana has certainly happened before in less glamorous instances. No one anticipated that Peter Frampton would ever sell 10 million copies of 1975's Frampton Comes Alive, while Vanilla Ice's 10 times platinum major label debut also came out of nowhere, garnering very little initial radio or MTV exposure and exploding largely through word of mouth. Nevermind did eventually get some goosing, however. DGC added the record to cooperative advertising programs with record store chains, stepped up distribution of promo items like posters and mobiles, gave certain retailers a discount on the wholesale price of the album, and then gave them more time to pay for the ones they bought. Sales kept exploding. SoundScan, a new system for charting records, was another factor. Based strictly on sales instead of an easily manipulated system of reporting, SoundScan revealed what people were actually buying, instead of what the major labels wanted people to buy. The New York Times reported that Geffen DGC used SoundScan as a marketing tool for Nevermind. SoundScan revealed that in certain markets, Nirvana was outselling Metallica 4-1, information Geffen DGC used to get Nirvana onto radio stations that were playing Metallica. Between September 24th and Christmas, it just had a life of its own, says Gary Gersh. By January, newsstands were packed with Nirvana stories, and the January 11th Saturday Night Live appearance further pushed sales. By this point, Nevermind was selling over 300,000 copies a week, including 373,250 in the last week of December. As kids went out and spent their Christmas cash and gift certificates on the album all their friends were talking about. That was when Nirvana unseated Michael Jackson as the #1 spot on Billboard's Top 200 Albums chart. The band was selling better than Garth Brooks, Metallica, U2, Guns N' Roses, and MC Hammer. Billboard magazine called Nevermind a cross-format phenomenon, appearing on hard rock, modern rock, college, and AOR stations, and eventually CHR. The fact that the album went to #1 was something of a freak, however. As luck would have it, U2 had decided to release its version of an art rock record. Michael Jackson continued his artistic slide, and Guns N' Roses saw fit to release 2 albums at once. They went up against some bad competition, so it wasn't hard for them to do great, says Steve Fisk. Here we go with Fisk again. Whenever music gets bad enough, that creates a window of opportunity, and shit happens. As Nirvana went out on a U.S. tour of venues that were far too small for their skyrocketing sales, it created an effect not unlike the one created by putting out their first single as a limited edition of 1,000. It made the ticket that much hotter, ratcheting up curiosity about the group and boosting sales. The Nevermind phenomenon symbolized a sea change in rock music. The so-called hair farmer bands Poison, Warrant, Winger, etc., that the Hollywood music establishment cranked out were perceived as mere entertainers, corporate employees, posers, fakes, and their substandard music and the pervasive sexism and machoism that invariably went hand in hand with it were getting very played out. And although they may have made a catchy song here and there, they didn't have any resonance. Part of the excitement was the excitement itself. It had been a long time since a rock band mattered, when an album seemed to define such a large and eminent cultural moment. There was something in the air, and Nirvana turned it into music. Buying a Nirvana album was something of a consumer insurrection. People were rejecting the old guard and going with what they felt, instead of what a large and well-oiled hype machine was telling them to buy. People were choosing substance over image. It was a somewhat tenuous connection, but there was a feeling in the bones that something surprising was going to happen in the election that November. The success of the album coincided with a general yearn for reality, encompassing things like MTV's Unplugged show, renewed interest in additive-free foods, the advent of network news segments that punctured the artifice of political advertising. We weren't doing any posing, and we weren't trying to be something that we weren't, Dave Grohl says. It was sort of a package deal. You've got good music, you've got normal-looking people, just like Bruce Springsteen can sell out the Enormodome in New Jersey because he's a fucking average Joe. I think it had a lot to do with something like that. Maybe. People seeing normal people and appreciating that. Nirvana embodied the yearning for a moral universe that was more real and more sincere than what was going on in the conventional rock world at the time, says Goldberg. And I think that resonates with a yearning in the culture for the post-Reagan set of values. There is a connection between their desire for authenticity and sincerity and ethics. It's a real commitment to an attitude that is very attractive. They convey a set of values that's egalitarian and ethics-driven and less macho, power-driven. All that stuff, combined with a musical genius, is what they are. Although Dave denies he is Mr. Analysis, he has an excellent grasp of the circumstances which gave rise to Nirvana's success. There was a weird lull, a void in rock, he says. If you looked at the top 10 in the year before Nevermind, there was rarely any rock music in it except for bad heavy metal shit that no one could relate to. When our music came out, I think it was a combination of stoners, skaters, of derelict kids who saw a group of derelict kids playing music that sounded like we were pissed off. And I think a lot of people related to that. And the songs were good songs. Kurt has a great voice. The songs were catchy and they were simple, just like an ABC song when you were a kid. An unstated goal of rock music is to bug one's parents. But 20-somethings' parents were raised on rock and roll themselves, so the job had become a lot tougher than it was in the 60s. With its ravaged screaming, pervasive distortion, and bludgeoning attack, Nevermind fulfilled that goal admirably. But beneath all that, there was no denying that the music was simply extraordinary. It captured all the energy and excitement of punk and applied it to songs that people could hum long after the album was finished playing. Unlike so many albums that consist of 1 or 2 singles and a bunch of filler, Nevermind is a really good album from front to back. You can put the CD on and listen to the whole thing and not skip over anything. The key to Nirvana is the songs are great, truly great, says the 50-something Ed Rosenblatt. I'm talking on a level with R.E.M., on a level with Paul Simon. That's true. I cannot think of a Nirvana song that I would skip over if it came on the radio or if I was playing a Nirvana CD or record. You just listen from the beginning to the end because they're all good. The only other bands I've been able to do that with is like Queens of the Stone Age, one of their records, the red one, I forget what it's called, the one with No One Knows. Every song is great. The Misfits, every song is great. Danzig, every song is great. Pantera, every song is great. Those bands are few and far between. Even Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Soundgarden, there are certain songs that I would skip over. Alice in Chains, I can pretty much listen to an Alice in Chains record front to back. Songs for the Deaf, by the way, that's what it was. The Queens, it's a great Queens record. Strangely, the press and the public don't think of him as such, but Kurt Cobain is a songwriter's songwriter. In one fell swoop, Kurt reclaimed pop songwriting from the convoluted, inbred freak it had become. This wasn't songwriting for its own sake. It's practiced by the likes of Elvis Costello, Marshall Crenshaw, and Michael Penn, who lately seem to take special pleasure in obscuring the very emotions they so very artfully claim to convey. Kurt's music went simply and directly to the soul. His lyrics weren't tortured wordplay aimed at tickling the fancy of some jaded rock critic. The chord progressions weren't designed to impress a Juilliard student. Instead, the words heightened the total sensation of the music, like a cool guitar sound or a riff. They made it rock. The music was ingenious in its economy. The melodies were indelible. I think it was Kurt's voice. Like Chris Novoselic said in that interview with Rick Beato, he said Kurt was a really intense guy and he meant every note. Like every note he sung had emotion in it. I think that's what really conveyed to people. I think that's what really got to people inside. I know it's what got to me. Butch Vig chalks a lot of it up to Kurt's voice. If you took all his songs and had someone else sing them, it wouldn't be the same, he says. There's something in Kurt's persona. Actually, that's what I was just talking about. Yes, I totally agree with this. Butch Vig chalks a lot of it up to Kurt's voice. If you look at all the songs and had someone else sing them, it wouldn't be the same, he says. There's something in Kurt's persona that takes them to another level. There's mystery and passion and intensity and something that's almost otherworldly in his voice. You hear his voice and it conjures up some kind of image in your mind. Totally agree with that statement. It's a phenomenon that Rolling Stone critic Ralph J. Gleason once identified as the yarg, a Gaelic word that refers to that rare quality that some voices have, an edge, an ability to say something about the human condition that goes far beyond merely singing the right lyrics and hitting the right notes. Semiologist Roland Bartels called it the grain of the voice. Either you have it or you do not. Robert Johnson had it. Hank Williams had it. These days, it's people like the Screaming Trees' Mark Lanegan and Kurt Cobain. I would say that although I enjoy a lot of Dave Grohl's songs, and he's a great songwriter, of course he lived with Kurt for a year, and he's said that Kurt taught him a lot about writing songs, so I would be surprised if Dave Grohl couldn't write a good song, but his voice doesn't do a lot for me. Like, it doesn't reach down in the depths of my soul, you know what I mean? It's a good voice, it's fun, I enjoy it, but it doesn't speak to me on a deeper level. Dave Grohl does have a fantastic scream, yell, guttural, whatever you want to call it, in his earlier stuff that he wrote by himself. I loved all the screaming. It was definitely better than what they're on to now. But, you know, motherfuckers get old. But each member brought something to the band. While Kurt's contributions are perhaps more obvious, Chris was for a very long time the sole liaison between the band and the press. His business sense is indispensable, and early on, his outspoken political sensibility helped to lend the band critical weight. Chris' onstage chemistry with Kurt is indefinable but clear, and not yet to be overlooked is his steadfast support of Kurt over the years in pursuing his musical vision. Could anyone else have been Kurt Cobain's bassist? I don't think so. I think they had the right chemistry. Dave's contribution to the band has largely been unsung. His powerful drumming propelled the band to a whole new plane, visually as well as musically. Try to imagine Come As You Are without the inspired cymbal bashing near the end that simply sends the track through the roof. The mighty snare rolls that machine gunned the band into the chorus of In Bloom. Although Dave is a merciless basher, his parts are also distinctly musical. It wouldn't be difficult to figure out what song he was playing, even without the rest of the music. His personal contribution is also essential. Pretty much under every circumstance, Dave's the one who's rock solid the whole time, says Alex McLeod. He's a good influence on both of them. Drummers do not get enough credit, unless you're somebody like Neil Peart, Danny Carey, Dave Grohl, Taylor Hawkins, that one guy in The Police. They don't get enough credit. If you have a solid drummer that's like a metronome, just keeping time and hard hitting, he's the one keeping the band together. As long as that bass drum is in time, they can jump right back in, and you might not even notice that they screwed up unless you're really paying attention. They've got it all, basically. Great drummer, great singer, great image, great songs, great sense of the media, great live band, says Danny Goldberg. It's all kind of worked. They excelled in a half a dozen areas. The album's impact was such that nowadays industry pundits talk about the post-Nirvana music business. One impact, as Matt Lukin puts it, is that after Nirvana, the underground isn't as underground as it used to be. Nirvana's success also demonstrated to the music business the snowballing power of the indie rock network. Nirvana could not have broken without all the years of hard work by labels like SST, Twin Tone, and Touch and Go, as well as bands like Sonic Youth, Black Flag, The Minutemen, The Replacements, and R.E.M., all of whom built a system by which kids could catch the indie buzz, outside of the influence of the major labels. I would really attribute that to the club owners who enjoyed the music enough, or the booking agent, the manager, who enjoyed that kind of music enough to book those types of bands and give them a network that they could tour through. And I would also attribute a lot of it to college radio DJs like Kristen Pfaff, who would be in there late at night playing what they wanted to play and not what they were being paid to play. Also, it's kind of disappointing that he didn't, they said great drummer, great singer, great image, great songs, but not great bassist. Chris was a phenomenal bassist. If you isolate his bass tracks in a lot of the songs and just listen to the bass, he often does not follow Kurt, and he'll be like off on some other thing. Like he's a really talented bassist. He's not your average bassist. He really knows what he's doing. Anyway, I'll get back to the chapter. Consequently, labels began paying more attention to bands with a following, i.e. bands that people actually liked, rather than creating one out of promotional dollars. They ceded some, though hardly all, of the control of what gets signed and promoted to a grassroots level. As regional music scenes gained power, they began to decentralize the music business. It shifted a fair amount of power from the corporate rock factions at the major labels to the people who had been following the indie rock scene. There's no question that there's 15 or 20 A&R people who can sign acts now who couldn't do that 2 years ago, says Goldberg. Those people began catching the next plane to Seattle, and pretty soon, any musician from the area with long hair and a flannel shirt could get signed for $350,000. Damn! I wish I'd have known that back then. I wouldn't have been old enough, but wouldn't that be sweet? Like all these A&R reps coming to your town. Every band, we don't even care. You got long hair and a flannel shirt, we'll give you a $350,000 cash advance. I'd be like, bet, I'll write the songs tonight. At one point in early 1992, Northwest bands were getting signed at the incredible rate of one a week. 52 bands a year? Jesus. I don't even own 52 records. The industry will be working all the bands that the new wave of A&R people is signing for years to come. And they did. And that's why there was such an incredibly high rate of one-hit wonders in the 90s. It makes sense now. They would just sign anybody, and they might have one great song, and the rest is just filler. Okay, it's coming together. Post-Nirvana, some hotly pursued alternative bands commanded a much higher advance than before. And since the labels didn't quite understand their music, the bands were granted complete creative control. That's something cool Kurt did for the music industry. Didn't last, but at least through the 90s, we got to have a shit ton of good bands come out. There are bands that, I was that kid in the bedroom with the tape deck, and at night, my local radio station had, I think it was from like 9 p.m. to like midnight, they would do the X, and they would play all the indie rock, grunge, alternative, and I would be the kid sitting there with the play and the record button, getting ready to press it as quickly as I could so I could make a mixtape, right? I wish I still had those mixtapes. I guarantee there are songs on those tapes that I would instantly recognize, that I would instantly be able to sing to, but I could not tell you the name of the band because there were so many one-hit wonder bands. As boomers get older, they buy fewer records. Nevermind heralded this changing of the music consumer guard. The major labels knew they had to begin addressing this emerging market, and that market suddenly became polarized between the people who would buy Def Leppard records, for instance, and those who would not. Mainstream radio got taught a lesson because a good record caught on without it, and everyone knew it wasn't a fluke because Nevermind was an undeniably great record. And there was an army of like-minded bands right behind Nirvana. By making a great album within the confines of a major label superstructure, keeping their integrity while acknowledging mainstream sonic taste, Nirvana made a point. Perhaps the ultimate message of the success of Nevermind was that even one little band, or person, can make big changes in a large and seemingly immovable institution. Ladies and gentlemen, that'll be it for Chapter 10. Next will be Chapter 11, and I'll get on that sooner than later. I know a lot of you really enjoy listening to the chapters of the book, so I'll try to get them out quicker for you. Coming up after this, the ending of the Max Wallace interview. Talking to Max, even through all the Respect Courtney crap that I gritted my teeth and listened to, it brought up a lot of ideas and a lot of questions that I have yet to talk about within the Nirvana series. Talking to him actually inspired a whole new video for the Nirvana series, something that I kind of thought I was through, but every time I think I'm through with it, more stuff pops up and I'm like, hey, well, wait, let's look at this. So that ought to be a good one too. Thank you guys so much for being a patron, for being a member, for being a viewer, for liking the videos. That's so important. And not a lot of people on my channel like my videos. They'll watch, but they don't like. It's really weird. I do appreciate it if you hit the like button because it helps in the YouTube algorithm. It helps the channel to grow, helps the message to spread. Perhaps we should also do a live chat soon. That's something we haven't done in a long time. We'll just keep rolling. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.